There's 88 people enrolled. There's 43 people here. And it's 9:05. So, oh well. Let's go ahead and get started. Maybe we can get this over a couple minutes early. Y'all can get back to your nice warm beds. New unit. Now, final exam, not a final exam per se, it's a fourth exam. So, we're starting really fresh here. This is the Reformation portion of the class. As I said at the very beginning of the semester, this class is really like a brief portion of three of my 3,000 level classes. The medieval class we started with, the Renaissance class we just did, and now the Reformation class. And so we got 6 lectures here in this unit. We start off in the century before the Reformation, in the 15th century, with today, revenge of the popes. We left the popes. They were in a bad place after the Council of Constance. We're going to see what happens after that in the 15th century. And then on Monday, talk about 2 reformers in the 14th and early 15th centuries who have a lot of the same ideas as Martin Luther will have in the early 16th century, but who really die unnoticed, as John Wycliffe in England and a guy named Jan Hus down in Bohemia, what is today Hungary. And then on next Wednesday, we will meet Martin Luther in 1517, a quarrel among Bavarian monks. He is a Catholic monk. He is living in Bavaria, and a quarrel among Bavarian monks is what the Pope at the time, Leo X, had to say about Martin Luther's challenge to his authority. Then we'll talk about what is Luther's theology. And it can really be summed up in 3 words: faith, scriptura, and salvation. So we'll talk about theology then in a week from today. Then the spread of the Reformation from its cradle in Germany to John Calvin's Geneva, where it becomes much more, what's the word I'm looking for, much more severe than in Luther's Germany. And then finally, day on the Roman Inquisition. In 1542, the Catholic Church in Rome decides to really assault head-on this Lutheran problem. Just 25 years after it began, but better late than never. And so we'll talk about the Roman Inquisition. So that's the next 6 lectures. Then we'll have a unit on Tudor England, on Henry VIII, on his children, Mary, Edward, and his most famous child, as Elizabeth. We end with the Spanish Armada's defeat in 1588. So let's get into this. And we got to go back in time. Something we've already seen, and that is the Council of Constance. Recall that in 1414, in order to end the Great Schism, in order to decide once and for all who is the rightful pope, a great church council convenes in modern-day Switzerland at a beautiful lakeside resort town today of Constance. And we saw how this council declared itself to be the supreme power in the Catholic Church with the decree Haec Sancta in 1415. Recall that it said that this Holy Synod of Constance, forming a general council for the extirpation of the present schism. Remember, there's not 1, not 2, but 3 popes at this point, 1 in Avignon, 1 in Rome, 1 in Pisa. Legitimately assembled in the Holy Ghost to the praise of omnipotent God, declares that this council has its power immediately from Christ. And even the papal dignity itself is bound to obey it. Previously, the Pope had claimed that he alone had power directly from Jesus via Matthew 16:18 And this is a really radical reformulation of the theological hierarchy of the church. And recall also that this council in 1417 declared that it would begin to meet regularly, difficult word to say, regularly at preset intervals. Prior to this, really only the Pope could call a council. And this is what's known as the conciliar revolution. Conciliar from the word council. And when we talked about this, I compared it to how, in a sense, our government works. Congress doesn't meet because the president asks Congress to meet. Congress meets because they meet regularly every 2 years. And this sets up a kind of small r republican system of government for the church, with diffused power not in the hands of a single monarch, that is, the Pope. And finally, we saw how this council elected a new Pope. To end the Great Schism, they deposed the 3 popes that were then in power, including the friend of the Medici, John the 23rd, and installed a descendant of Sciarra Colonna, that man who really took up arms against Boniface VIII in 1303, and that's Oddone Colonna, who takes the name Martin V. He's the only pope that's not elected by the College of Cardinals. He's elected by the council. And he is a Roman. And he sets up shop in Rome. And most of his fairly long reign until 1431 is concerned with trying to put the pieces back together again. The papacy in the 12th and 13th centuries have been a very, very powerful institution, as we've seen, but now they are playing really second fiddle to the council, capital C, council. Martin V wants to slowly but surely rebuild the monarchical authority of the papacy. And today we're going to look at about a half dozen of his successors leading up to the early 16th century and the Medici Pope, Leo X. And we begin today with Nicholas V. Nicholas V doesn't have a particularly long reign, 1447 to 1455, but he does two important things. First, he establishes brands the papacy, if you will, to use modern terminology. Prior to Nicholas V, popes had used their own family's coat of arms in their official correspondence, in their artwork, etc. They had each pope had a kind of individual feel, if you will. But Nicholas establishes that from this point forward, the papal symbol will be the 2 crossed keys, the keys that were given to St. Peter in Matthew 16:18. Jesus says to his disciple Simon, I give you the keys of heaven and earth to bind and to loose, to send people to heaven, to damn them to hell. Now each pope will add between the keys their own family crest. But this is a way to emphasize the Petrine nature of the papacy, because this is the Pope's trump card. They have Matthew 16:18. They have 3 verses in the New Testament which they claim they derive their power from. And so Nicholas brands, if you will, use a very modern term, the papacy moving forward with the keys of St. Peter, and to this day, that is the symbol of the Vatican City now. The small remnant left from the once great papal state. That's not all of it. There's one other thing. He transfers the headquarters of the Bishop of Rome from the Lateran Basilica. Remember that basilica built in 313 by Constantine, transfers the headquarters across the city to the Vatican, to St. Peter's Basilica, also built by Constantine on the site of Peter's martyrdom and burial. Again, the idea is to more firmly tie the Pope to Peter, that great source of their legitimacy. And to this day, the headquarters of the papacy is in St. Peter's. The Pope is the Bishop of Rome, and the Bishop of Rome, his church is the Lateran Basilica. But the popes from Nicholas V onward will be in the Vatican, and that's, of course, what Benedict XVI is today. Next up, Pius II. Also, not a particularly long reign, 1458 to 1464. Pius will directly attack the conciliarism of the previous generation. He will issue a papal decree. Remember, they're called papal bulls, from the bulla, the seal on the outside of them. And the papal bull, in this case, is called execrabilis. Execrabilis, because it begins an execrable. It's a hard word to say. Execrable. Abuse has grown up in our day, that certain persons presume to appeal from the Pope to a future council. In spite of the fact that the Pope is the vicar of Jesus Christ, and to him, in the person of Peter, following was said, "Whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven." A direct quote lifted from Matthew 16:18. Wishing to expel this pestiferous poison from the Church of Christ and to care for the salvation of the fold entrusted to us, we condemn all such appeals and prohibit them as erroneous and detestable. With Haec Sancta, the council had declared itself the supreme power in the church. The council had declared that it went God and Jesus, the Holy Spirit to a lesser extent, and then council, and then Pope. But the Pope himself had to obey the council. And this is a condemnation of conciliarism, a declaration that any appeal over the Pope's head to a future council, that this is erroneous and detestable, this pestiferous poison of conciliarism, attempt to reassert the monarchical rights of the successors to Peter here, Pope Pius II, and Execrabilis, an important piece of primary source evidence. Let's meet another pope, Sixtus IV. Now, he does have a long reign, almost 15 years, from 1471 to 1484. And it's Sixtus IV that will build the chapel that bears his name. And that is, of course, the Sistine Chapel, named for Sisto in Italian. It's not Sixtus in Italian, it's Sisto, and so the Cappella Sistina is the chapel of Sixtus, or Sisto in Italian. And this is what it looked like from the outside in the 15th century. It's part chapel, but it also has a fortress-like quality to it. The windows are very high up on the walls, and it has this battlements and crenellations at the top. That's because one of the functions of the Sistine Chapel was to serve as a refuge of last resort in the event of a siege of the Vatican. And that may sound like something that would be unlikely, but as we're going to see, in the 16th century, such an event does in fact happen in 1527. And it's also... Question?
What was his, number?
Oh, 6 is the 4th. Yeah, sorry. 1471 to 1484. I know it gets confusing with all these Roman numerals after these guys' names. Remember that popes choose their name based upon a previous pope that they admired, and they end up getting lots of Roman numerals, like Benedict the 16th today. So this is Sixtus the 4th, 1471 to 1484. But fortress is really the emergency use of this chapel. Its main function is to serve as an audience chamber for people coming to see the Pope, as a grand audience chamber. And this is what it would have looked like in the 16th century. There's Michelangelo's Last Judgment on the altar wall, and the Pope would sit on a throne right in front of the altar, and people wanting to see the Pope would approach him in this magisterial room, a way to emphasize the monarchical status of the Roman pontiff. And on the walls, before Michelangelo comes and does the ceiling, the walls contain important messages for people coming to see the Pope. Originally, the ceiling was a blue star field, just like the ceiling of the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua. And it was on the walls initially that the important messages were conveyed to those coming to see the Pope. Question?
So they did the 5,000 square feet in that ultramarine?
I don't think it was actually ultramarine. Well, there's various shades of blue. I don't think they did the whole ceiling in ultramarine, because that would be very expensive. And the papacy at this point is trying to get its feet back under itself, and that kind of expenditure would be not necessarily in the fiscal cards. But they do have money to fresco the walls, and they bring in some big names to do the fresco. Yes?
I know you already asked this, but what exactly did Pope Pius II?
Execrabilis.
What is that? I know I got that.
Alright, let's go back to it. Okay. Certain persons presume to appeal from the Pope to a future council. The Council of Constance had declared that the supreme power in the church was a council. And Pope Pius II is declaring here that that is absolutely not the case. That Matthew 16:18 is my primary source evidence, and in Matthew 16:18, Jesus doesn't talk about councils. He talks about giving keys to his disciple Simon, who he renames Petrus, or the rock, in Latin. And this is a direct attack on the conciliarists, as they are known, who argue that the council is the supreme power in the church. So this is a declaration that anyone who supports conciliarism is, in a sense, committing a heresy. Okay? All right, let's go back to Pius. And up to 60, sorry. All right, back to the Sistine Chapel. Back to the walls. Okay, so there's paintings on the walls, frescoes, you can see here, that will be visible to the people who come to see the Pope in this audience chamber. And some big names are brought in to do these frescoes. One of them is Perugino, a second-tier Renaissance artist, but I think one that's quite good. And he depicts here Christ giving the keys to Simon, becoming Peter in the process. You can see one key, two keys. Here is Simon Peter, and here is Jesus. This is a huge fresco, about 6 by 8 feet, 6 by 10 feet, quite large. And so you come into the audience chamber, and the Pope's up there on the throne, and you look up, and you're reminded that it is the successors of Peter who were designated lieutenants of Jesus, not a council, not a large conciliar body. And from an artistic perspective, you can notice the intense perspective in this painting, the very conspicuous perspective, in fact. But the important part for our purposes are the people gathered here in the foreground, especially Simon Peter and Jesus. Yes?
Can Michelangelo paint over them?
He was painting the ceiling. These are on the walls.
So they're still there?
Yeah, they're still there. Oh yeah, you can go see them to this day. But that's not all that's painted on the walls. Botticelli's brought it. 1482, he paints a rather obscure scene from the Old Testament, from the book of Exodus. The punishment of Korah. Now, this is not one of the better known biblical stories, but it's one that's important for the Pope's rebuilding of their authority here. Korah challenged the authority of Moses while they're in the wilderness for the 40 years after the escape from Egypt. Korah challenged Moses' supreme power, and God struck down Korah for his impudence and for his lack of respect for the monarchical authority of Moses. And so this scene with Moses here and Korah being smoked on the left side would be an important message that the Pope is trying to get across to those who would challenge the monarchical authority of the Pope. Just as God destroyed the enemies of Moses, he will destroy the enemies of the Pope, those people who presume to appeal to a future council. This is another powerful propaganda message that the bishops of Rome, the popes, are trying to inculcate in people who come to see them in their regal audience chamber, the Capella Sistina. That's Sixtus IV, for whom the Sistine Chapel is named. Now, a pope we've already met, Julius II, will also attempt to reestablish the monarchical authority of the Bishop of Rome. Recall that there was a Pope Julius I in the 300s. He's really a pope of no account, and nothing is really known of him. Julius II takes the name Julius because he is an ardent admirer of Julius Caesar. He's a very warlike pope, despite his seemingly advanced age. In that portrait there by Raphael, he is determined to reestablish the monarchical authority of his office. And arguably his most important thing is not the commissioning of Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. That's a great artistic work. But from a marketing standpoint, if you will, he initiates a massive reconstruction project. The demolition and rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica. By the 1500s, St. Peter's Basilica is in its 12th century. The building is showing its age. And it was never that large to begin with. Julius II wants to rebuild it into a massive new structure befitting the authority and power of his office. And so he brings in a rather obscure architect, a Florentine, named Donato Bramante. interesting and amusing side note. Donato Bramante is working on this project in Rome in the early 1500s. Small project called the Tempietto. This nice, but very small, circular little chapel catches the eye of the Pope and Pope Julius II, and he is brought in for this massive reconstruction project. In 1508, Michelangelo arrives to begin work on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was faced with a scaffolding problem, because the Sistine Chapel, during those 4 years, still needed to be usable. And so Donato Bramante approaches the very young Michelangelo. He's 30 years younger than Bramante, and offers to help him build some scaffolding in the Cappella Sistina. And Michelangelo yells at him and kicks him out of the Sistine Chapel because Michelangelo is a jerk. And Donato Bramante scurries off with his tail between his legs, chastised by the much younger and much brasher Michelangelo. And Michelangelo designed the scaffolding himself. But that's just an interesting side note. Let's see what this redesign that Bramante proposes will look like. It's a center plan church. It's a symmetrical design, very much unlike the existing basilica built by Constantine in 326. And this is a commemorative medal that was struck that gives us a sense of what it was supposed to look like, with a massive dome here right in the center, and some very Greek-looking porticos and porches on the facade. In a sense, it looks like something that Andrea Palladio would build almost a century later in Venice. But work proceeds very slowly. Bramante dies, and the project languishes. The 1520s come and go. The 1530s come and go. And in 1547, 42 years into the project, with it completely stalled, with the old basilica gone, it's been torn down, and nothing really taking its place, a desperate papacy turns to Michelangelo, the artist, the painter, the sculptor, and also architect, to come in and save the project, revive the reconstruction of St. Peter's, and he reluctantly agrees. And he modifies slightly Donato Bramante's original plan, but not a whole lot. Elaborates on it, embellishes it, but keeps the same basic center plan design with an altar right there over the tomb of St. Peter. And this sketch here on the left side of the screen shows what it was supposed to look like. A very symmetrical center plan church, not a basilica shape at all, but retaining the huge dome originally proposed by Donato Bramante. But Michelangelo dies, and the project begins to fall behind once again, and work slows to a crawl. And in 1603, 98 years after the project began, in year 98 of the reconstruction of St. Peter's, a new architect is brought in, Carlo Maderno, and he screws everything up. He modifies the Bramante and Michelangelo design by adding essentially a large nave, turning what had been a center plan church into a much more traditional basilica shape. And if you look at an aerial satellite photo of St. Peter's, you can see that, in fact, this is the final shape that the church will have. And the problem with this addition on the front, the addition of this nave, which turns a center plan church into a basilica, is that the proportions are all wrong. And the best thing you can say about Carlo Maderno is that in 1612 the church is finished under his watch. But if you look at it from the front, it's all weirdly proportioned. The great dome is half hidden by the facade. The whole aesthetics of the building are off. And it's all because Carlo Maderno decided to make it more traditional and add all of this space to the front of the original Michelangelo and Bramante center plan cross. The dome should be prominent. The dome was supposed to be the focal point, but if you're standing in front of it, you can barely see the dome. I don't like Carlo Maderno. I think he really screwed it up. It should be much more beautiful than it is, and instead it has this very bulky facade that hides half of the dome. It's an architectural disaster. But he finished it, and so I guess you have to give him a little credit for finishing a project that had languished for more than a century at this point, the reconstruction of St. Peter's. And this becomes the largest church in the world, larger than the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. Finally, last pope we're going to talk about today is a Medici. The son of Lorenzo de' Medici, Giovanni, who in 1513, upon the death of Julius II, becomes Pope Leo X.
Before long, Giovanni received dramatic news. His mentor and master, Pope Julius II, was dead. In time-honored tradition, the cardinals were all called to Rome. It was their job to elect a new pope.
Cardinals were meeting in the latrines to plot about who was going to be elected, and I think there is a lot of that on one hand, favors to be exchanged under the table, plotting, networking, but there is also a higher level, a more international level. The Medici were definitely more welcomed as potentially new popes because of their already established international profile.
After a whole week of deliberation, the cardinals were still undecided, but the reduction of the daily meal to a single unappetizing dish finally focused their thoughts. And the most senior cardinal, Giovanni, would cast the deciding vote. And it was his privilege to announce the winner. From now on, Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici would be known as Papa Leone X, Pope Leo X. Giovanni's accession to the papacy changed everything. The city of Florence now welcomed back its former enemy with open arms.
We should not forget that this is a deeply Christian culture, and any city would have easily forgotten any guilt of any type and forgiven the person if this person would have occupied the position of the papacy. It's a kind of prestige and an honor for the city.
For the first time in history, the leader of the Catholic Church had been born in Florence. The Pope soon capitalized on his new status to strengthen the position of the Medici family.
When the Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici becomes Pope, within a month, his cousin Giulio is made Archbishop of Florence, and in the autumn, he also becomes a cardinal. So now you've got a Medici Pope and you've got a Medici Cardinal. This is one of your examples of nepotism, which all the Renaissance popes practiced.
As part of the celebrations, Leo had a young boy painted gold from head to toe. It was pure propaganda, implying the return of a golden age under the Medici. The boy died shortly afterwards, poisoned by the gold paint on his skin. His death went unnoticed, and the papal celebration went on for days.
Giovanni was a fun lover. He loved drinking, he loved hunting. The moment he was made Pope, he wrote a letter to one of his brothers saying, "God has given the papacy to us, let us enjoy it."
Pope Leo X hosted elaborate dinners night after night. One ambassador sent a breathless letter home.
The meal was exquisite. There was an endless succession of dishes, for we had 65 courses.
Giovanni de' Medici had risen higher than any of his ancestors.
Indeed, he has. And as he writes to a family member, God has given us the papacy. Let us enjoy it. Enjoy it, he did. Spending a lot of money. Julius II had built up an impressive treasury, his predecessor. But very, very quickly, Giovanni exhausts that treasure.
Leo created hundreds of new jobs in the Vatican and sold them to those he could trust. And he needed the money. Because within just 1 year of his extravagant lifestyle, he had emptied the papal coffers. Soon, Leo X owed money to every bank in Rome. Behind the scenes, Giulio was pawning the papal jewels. So Leo turned to the source of income only available to the Pope himself, the sale of forgiveness.
He started selling what are called papal indulgences. And these are basically pieces of paper which give you remission from sins. So if you've been naughty in some respect, the Pope would sell you an indulgence which would remit your sins, it would cleanse your sins.
Leo wasn't the first Pope to sell indulgences, but he sold them on an unparalleled scale. And his tariff was affordable to even the poorest man. Across Europe, Leo found a ready market, because an indulgence could mean freedom from an eternity in hell.
The church created the figure of the itinerant preacher of indulgences, which would stop in the main piazzas of cities and towns and preach for a specific indulgency. And if people would buy an indulgence. They were released a receipt.
The sale of salvation was a gold mine for the Pope. An indulgence could even be bought on behalf of the dead, so that their soul might be sped on its journey to heaven. Profits from the sale of absolution were lifting Pope Leo out of debt.
Indulgences. Important piece of primary source evidence. They exist before Leo, but he sells them in numbers that are staggering. Using the printing press, something we'll talk more about next week, he is able to mass produce these indulgences, and he sells them for a very low price. Figures out that quantity is much better than quality, if you will. The theology behind indulgences argues that when Jesus died and left this earth, he left behind what they call a treasury of merit. And that treasury was controlled by his lieutenant, Peter, and by Peter's successors, such as Pope Leo X. They predate Leo, but he sells them on an unprecedented scale.
Don't unfurl the banners until the fire is out. Everything has been prepared. Exactly as instructed. Good people of Uterberg, have you ever burned your hand in the fire? Even one finger made raw by the flame will torment you throughout the night. Is it not so? Imagine then, your entire body burning. Not for one sleepless night, not for a week, but for all eternity. Are we to be spared the fires of damnation on the judgment day? Tonight, your Pope, the Vicar of Christ, sends you a gift to save you from such fires. A special indulgence granted for the building of St. Peter's Church in Rome, where the bones of the apostles lie mouldering, exposed to wind and rain, desecrated by wild animals. Take heed, the words of your Holy Father, who says, lay a stone to St. Peter's, and you lay the foundation for your own salvation and happiness in heaven. How? With this indulgence. When? Tonight. And only tonight. Seek the Lord while he is near. Here is your raft. Take hold.
In heaven there is a treasure chest filled with merit. Merit from Christ Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and the saints who, through their holy lives, have merit to spare for us, poor sinners in need. Tonight that treasury is open to you. Do you not hear their voices? The screaming voices. Your deceased parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, screaming, beloved child, beloved child. Because for a few coins, you can rescue them from their punishments and pain. Listen. Open your ears. Father calling to son. Mother to daughter. When a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. God-fearing man, do you have a coin for Christ? Yes. Gentle mother, when the time comes, make certain your crippled child can run to Jesus. These learned monks are standing by to write down your name or the name of a loved one, dead or alive, on this, your passport to the celestial joys of paradise. Name. You come down. Name.
Hard sell there. Your crippled child going to love Jesus. And scenes like that are repeated all across Europe. And Leo X returns to solvency. But as we're going to see, the price that the papacy will pay for this financial windfall is very high indeed. But that is for another lecture. So we started off with Oddone Colonna, Martin V, elected by the Council of Constance. Nicholas V, who brands the papacy with the keys of St. Peter and transfers the corporate headquarters of the Lateran Basilica to St. Peter's Basilica. Pius II, who in the second year of his pontificate issues execrabilis, declaring that any appeal to a council is heresy. Sixtus IV, who constructs the Sistine Chapel, which bears his name, and hires Perugino and Botticelli to fresco the walls with the images of Christ giving the keys to Peter and the punishment of Korah, the rebel against the authority of Moses in the book of Exodus. Julius II, who not only commissions Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, but tears down the old Constantian Basilica of St. Peter's and puts in its place, well, begins to put in its place, a new building which will become the largest church in the world, larger than the Hagia Sophia. And finally, Leo X, who enjoys women, who enjoys gambling, who enjoys drinking, who enjoys spending money. And because he enjoys spending so much money, he has to turn to the sale of forgiveness, the sale of indulgences, to return to solvency. So, when we come back on Monday, we'll stay in the 15th century. We're not going to meet Martin Luther yet. We're going to look at what I call the Reformation that wasn't. The world of Jan Hus and John Wycliffe, who espouse many of the same arguments as Martin Luther, but live in a world before the printing press, and so become little more than historical footnotes instead of massive figures like Martin Luther, who has the printing press. So, have a nice weekend. See you back here on Monday.